My name's Cameron Sublett. I'm an associate professor of education at Pepperdine University. Although before joining Pepperdine this past fall, I was at Santa Barbara City College as a faculty member for the past 10 years. So a lot of my observations that I'll be talking about today and my research was born out of my experience serving in the community college classroom for a good portion of my professional career. So what I'm trying to do with my research now at this point is to take a holistic perspective of online learning at the community college level. So there's a bunch of research that has investigated online learning and the impacts for students piecemeal. What are the impacts of online learning for student success? What are the impacts for online learning in transfer? But what we're still lacking, in my estimation, is sort of a holistic perspective of what's going on system-wide to account for the tremendous growth in online learning that you previously mentioned. And then with that framework in mind, how can we get in front of this change so we can better inform policy? So what I'm going to be sharing with you today is my work to try and build that conceptual model and just take into consideration that this is very much in its beta version. And one of the things that got me really excited about joining you all today here at this conference was the ability to get potential feedback on how you think I could tweak this model to include things that I might have left out, or maybe to shape it in ways that you think best reflect what's really going on. So a little bit of background that I'll go through quickly because we're all community college interested, so we're all kind of up to speed on the trends in higher education writ large. But higher education is changing dramatically at this very moment that we're sitting here together. To just give it short shrift, we'll say that it's changing in terms of enrollment, changing in terms of its appropriation, changing in terms of the faculty composition and this notion of adjunctification, ballooning costs and debt associated with attending college and post-secondary education. There's a growing focus on accountability metrics, cost efficiency, rising demands for access, equity, and social justice, and of course, technological disruption and the seeming inexorable growth of online learning. And it's this last component, it's really the last two components that is the subject of my entire body of empirical inquiry. Online learning for two-year community college students, and in particular, how online learning can stifle or potentially improve equity. So just a bit of numbers here. Even though total enrollment in post-secondary degree granting institutions has declined over the years, we'll focus on just 2012 to 2016. You can see that from 2012 to 2016, overall enrollment declined at a rate of around 4%. During this exact same time period, the share or percentage of students taking some or all of their classes at a distance or online has actually trended in the opposite direction, climbing from just over 25% to just over 30%, okay, over a 4-year time span. So that's roughly about 5 percentage points. Now, accessing publicly available data through the California Community College Chancellor's Office reveals a similar trend going on in our state here of California. What I was able to do was download total FTES and simply slice it out by the percentage of total FTES that are allocated towards online learning environments. And you can see total FTES has declined from 2008 and 9 to 2016-17. But if you look here, the share of students taking at least one online class has actually trended the other direction. So we could say confidently that more students are taking classes online. And I'll use online throughout this presentation rather than distance education because when you actually break down the numbers, very few students are taking classes through a correspondence mode anymore. Everything's mostly online. And so is this a good news, bad news situation? And that's what a lot of research has up to this point focused on. Does online learning help or hinder CC students? And for those of you that are familiar with this body of research, it's pretty frustrating, but the reality is the research is sparse and the research is mixed. I've done a decent job of trying to follow this body of literature, and I've categorized it by the outcomes that have been examined. And you can see the lion's share of the literature focus on the proximal measure of course completion. Then there's some that look at course grade, there's fewer that look at college persistence, fewer that look at transfer, and fewer that look at the effect of online learning for program completion. Okay? And if you were to actually go through these articles and read them, you start to develop an idea of kind of what's going on. If you were to focus on each individual piece, things contradict one another. But in the aggregate, what we see is this thing called the online paradox. That is, in the short term, students tend to be penalized by taking classes online. They're less likely to complete their class, they're less likely to persist in that class, they're less likely to perform well in that class measured by final course grade. However, if you look at a number of the studies that have looked at the long-term outcomes, students that take online classes at the 2-year level have higher rates of program completion and transfer. So it's this funny phenomenon wherein students incur a short-term decrement in their academic achievement, but enjoy a long-term academic benefit. So if anybody is in the dissertation stage right now, I would implore you to investigate the online paradox. It just seems like a fantastic area to study. If I was going to go and do it again, that's what I would probably go investigate. The good news is that the disparity in achievement between face-to-face and online in the state of California is starting to diminish. This is a graph supplied from the California Community College Chancellor's Office, and you can see that in 2005 and 2006 there was a 17 percentage point disparity in achievement between students in online classes and face-to-face, and that's diminished over time. That's a good news story. But this reality is actually much more nuanced. In a recent Inside Higher Ed piece, myself and my co-author Chris Newfield took these exact same data supplied from the California Community College Chancellor's Office, reproduced their graph, but then we disaggregated it by race. And what you actually find out is that consistently white and Asian students outperform the state average, okay, in both online, face-to-face and online classes, and then students that are black and Latino consistently underperform the state average. And if this is 4 credit courses. If you were to then look at basic skills courses, the racial inequity becomes exacerbated even further. Okay? So, given the observed and projected growth in online learning, the vast public resources that have been allocated to support online learning, at least in the state of California, and the need for informed and forward-thinking policy around online learning in the community college sector, I think it's important we understand the factors that explain the observed growth we've seen and the factors that are going to potentially shape online learning in the years ahead, because online learning is not going anywhere despite any sort of negative outcomes associated with it. The factors that will contribute to shape online learning moving forward are important to uncover now, sooner rather than later. And we need to do this in order to make sound and effective policy, to inform future and ongoing research, improve outcomes, increase equity, and to fulfill the CC mission. So this is my labor here, is to try and provide a conceptual model of online learning in the community college system. What is accounted for the growth? What do I think is going to account for the development of online learning moving forward? And I have isolated what I argue are 5 factors. First is the economy, leadership and policy, education technology and vendors, faculty and students, and the public post-secondary dialectic. And what I'll do in the remainder of my time is just to go over each one of these factors with you very, very briefly. But keep in mind that I'm in the process of writing a book on this. I'm in the process of working with people to put together individual research manuscripts kind of that might illustrate that what I have here is something that's valid or something that's completely wrong. So I'm just going to go over things relatively briefly with you. So first, let's look at the first factor, which is economy. CCs have always been early adopters of distance education, correspondence courses in the earliest iteration years and years and years ago. And the reason that this is because, as you all know, a fundamental kind of mission of the CC is access, okay? And so correspondence courses, online courses, are a clear way to increase access. But it must be acknowledged that a number of economic exigencies have increased the use and the spread of online learning. For instance, there are gradual but empirically verifiable consistent decreases in state appropriations. If you look at the state of California, you can see that funding for higher education has decreased over the past 30 years. Now, interestingly, some of you are probably saying, yeah, Cameron, but it's primarily a decrease for UC, some for CSU, but if you look at CCCs, actually in the state of California, funding for CCCs has actually increased. That is true, but that doesn't debunk my economy factor here, because California is a tremendous outlier in the country. If you look at the country writ large, there is far less funding for the community college systems within the states. California has the lowest tuition in the nation for our community college students. Okay? Absolutely rock bottom. We're well below the state average and far below the highest, which is Vermont and New Hampshire. Okay? So the fact that funding for the CCCs in the state of California hasn't really decreased, I don't think goes against my thesis that economic exigencies, primarily the decrease in appropriations, is a driver for online learning. Furthermore, if you look at some other economic exigencies, you'll see further proof. One, there's increased net costs to students, okay? Enrollment and appropriations pinched following the Great Recession. As you're all probably aware, right after the Great Recession, state appropriations for the CCCs went down at the exact same time that enrollments went up. Okay, and it led to this thing called the bottleneck in the state of California, where students wanted to get courses, but they couldn't because schools didn't have the resources to make those classes available. And so at that moment was really when the MOOC mania hit an apogee. Do you all remember MOOC mania? Yeah, so right around that time, people were like, what are we going to do to address the bottleneck? And then Jerry Brown said, well, let's put everybody in MOOCs, because that will alleviate the demand, right? So that's one factor. Also, there's a growing cost efficiency paradigm that we cannot deny. There's now recent enrollment declines. So enrollment did go up following the recession, but now it's going down and down and down and down consistently. And as a result, schools, which are based on, their funding is based on FTES, are having to think creatively to make sure that they still have students in order to remain financially viable. And one way to do that is to what? Increase your reach through online learning. And this is also leading to market competition. Schools now are competing for a dwindling pool of students, and in different states. All right? So this has almost kind of led to an arms race, I would argue, for online learning programs. The second factor I would argue that's led to the development and shaping of online learning is leadership and policy at the federal, state, and even local level. And I won't go over each one of these policies individually just to not bore you. I'm happy to talk about these in more detail later, but just going over them rather quickly. At the federal level, we see a push towards competency-based education, which prioritizes not hours in the classroom, but demonstration of skills. Online learning is the best way to go about doing that. Even policies like stripping away protections of net neutrality, I think, are going to have impacts of online learning, not necessarily making it grow, but actually making it more difficult for students, right? Many of the community college students that I used to work with at Santa Barbara City College took their classes online at Starbucks on their phone. Okay, I think we have an idea of what an online learning student looks like that's stereotypical and idyllic, but in reality, many students don't even have an internet access, but they're in an internet-based class, okay? So, of course, policies like net neutrality are going to impact their ability to get access to those courses. At the state level, we'll just focus on the state of California. Governor Jerry Brown is a big proponent of online learning. He's now proposing that we generate an entirely new community college campus in this state that is entirely online, okay? SB 520, advanced by Darrell Steinberg years ago at the MOOC apogee, said what we could do is allow students that need to get courses but they can't get them at their local CCs is to get them credits from Straighterline and Udacity, MOOC providers. You see the online education initiative in the state of California with its various components, the California Virtual Campus. You also have the course exchange. All of these policies are definitely building in the capacity for online learning in the state of California. Keep in mind also that states like Michigan and Florida now require students to complete online classes in high school in order to graduate. And many of those students take those classes as dual enrollment, okay? And then at the district and school level, you have all of the bodies within schools that we're familiar with, right? Like Board of Trustees, they have an influence on online learning. Faculty resource centers that teach students teach faculty how to teach online. Curriculum advisory committees, right? These are the advisory boards that allow a class to be taught online or not to be taught online. The third factor I'd like to talk about very briefly is also ed technology and technology vendors. Technology has pervaded all of our society, right? We shop online, we vote online, we date online. It's only natural that now we're learning online. So technology is pervading society. Education is not isolated in this regard. Education technology has vastly improved over just the past 5 years, let alone 10 years, right? And it's improved in 3 really important ways that aid online learning. First, in terms of collaboration. Second, in terms of interaction. And third, in terms of personalization. And this increase in education technology has then led to the usage of increased technology, which has created a market demand. And it's hard keeping track of all of the entities and the organizations that are seeking to profit off online learning and e-learning. If you were to just isolate the market for learning management systems like Blackboard and Moodle, Sakai, Canvas, that's a $1 to $2 billion market, just the LMS. If you were to focus on the OPMs like 2U and Pearson, that's another $2 to $3 billion market. So there's tons of money to be made in online learning. We'd be kidding ourselves if we denied that the profit motive is also going to, in some way, shape, grow, whatever word you want to use, online learning for community college students. If you want an example of these 3 factors that I've just discussed colliding with one another, you can see that with economy and policy and tech, you had really MOOCs, right? They were all kind of converging together. Moving on to the 4th factor, faculty and students. Ultimately, faculty, those of you that are faculty, you know this, you have the decision whether or not you want to teach a class online or face-to-face. Sure, your department chair or your dean might say we need to offer this class, but you don't really are not forced to teach a class face-to-face online. A lot of times that decision is made by the instructor. Okay, now, if you're also looking for another area of dissertation study, I would recommend investigating that decision process for faculty at the community college level. Why do faculty decide to teach a class online versus not? Is it convenience for the faculty? I know personally that a lot of my colleagues would decide they wanted to offer all of a sudden their class online because it was convenient over the summer, because they could travel with their family, or maybe they were teaching an overload beyond their TLU limit, right? And then when you get stretched that thin, it's easier if that class is online rather than face-to-face. But is it also student demand? Maybe faculty are responding to student demand, okay? We don't really know, but that decision lies at the heart, ultimately with faculty. Students also have a voice in the matter. Shauna Smith-Jaggers at the Community College Research Center has done some great qualitative research that has found that students are enrolling in online classes for 3 main reasons. Like the decision is based on 3 factors. One is like, is this course suitable to learning online? Is there a lab component? Is there an oral speaking component? Another factor is difficulty. Students, if the class is really, really difficult, the students prefer to take it in person rather than online. If it's really easy, they choose to take it online. If they feel like it doesn't really speak to them, they don't like it, they'll choose to take it where? Online. If they don't like a class, they'll just say, I want to take that online. Just like when I get a speeding ticket and I have to go to the DMV, right? I'd much rather take that online because I don't like having to do that driver's ed thing again, right? So I'll take it online rather than going and investing my time in person. Think about the opportunity cost of sitting there, right? I would also argue that students sometimes have no choice in the matter. We need to acknowledge that. There are some schools that don't offer courses, and so students have to take them online elsewhere. This is where the course exchange comes in the state of California. There's also some courses that are only offered online, only offered face-to-face within institutions because the bandwidth is so low. So sometimes students don't even have a choice. I will say that if you read a lot of the popular literature, there's this discussion about student demand and convenience. Students want online learning. Students want online courses. And I would humbly submit to you that that is overstated. In fact, if you look at the empirical literature, most students say they prefer to learn face-to-face. They like knowing their instructors. They like meeting their peers. They like hearing what their peers have questions on. They prefer to learn face-to-face. But with that said, there's these three factors here that we can't ignore. Sometimes they would prefer to take it online. The last factor I'd like to discuss is what I'm deeming the public post-secondary dialectic. I'm open to new terms for this, so if you have a better way of phrasing it, I would be happy to adopt your better terminology. But essentially, what I'm arguing is that higher education and society kind of feed one another, right? So society tells higher education what it wants, and then higher education, based on its mission and its goals, tells society this is what we deem is important. And it's this dialectical exchange that we have with our romantic partners and our parents or whatever it might be that's going on also with higher education and society. And I would wager or submit to you that that dialectic is going to influence the shape and development of online learning moving forward. And this kind of gets us into the area of philosophy here. What is it that we want from higher education today, right? We're kind of at a critical crossroads in our society. Right now, people are more skeptical of higher education, arguably, than ever before. They see the rising costs, they see debt, they see people that are famous in our society that never went to college. There is now alternatives to going to college, right? Like going to coding school. The highest paid jobs now in our society don't often require college. So there's a lot of skepticism. So we're kind of at a critical crossroads in our society. So we need to ask ourselves, how is that going to change whether or not online learning grows, diminishes, how that's delivered? What's the purpose of higher education for students? Is it just to demonstrate competency? Does higher education have a larger sociological component or mechanism in our society? Are we striving for college for all? Or are we seeking to get people through college with degrees or maybe just skills? Okay, these are all really important philosophical questions that I think have some, at the very minimum, tangential connection to online learning moving forward. We also need to factor in what's the purpose of higher education for employers, right? Are they looking for students that are coming out of college with a degree writ large in civil engineering or whatnot, or are they just looking for demonstrable proven skills, right? And then also it's a good question to ask, what is the market value of a fully online degree? Okay, and that's one of the, I think, reasons why online learning has also not grown more than it has, is that there tends to be great skepticism in the employer community about students coming out that went solely to a fully online program, okay? And then last, we need to ask ourselves, what's the purpose of higher education for civil society? So in conclusion, you can't doubt it that online learning is going to grow moving forward. Okay, our society is only going to become more technologically adept and technologically dependent. Education is not going to change, and in fact, we're doing ourselves a disservice in higher education and in the community college if we push back against that, like a lot of people are arguing we should do. We need to embrace it. Hybrid learning tends to often be ignored in the literature, but that's where the greatest promise of online learning arguably is in the combination of face-to-face and fully online learning environments. The good news is that outcomes in online environments tend to be improving over time. Technology is getting better. Faculty are learning how to teach online better. Students are learning how to learn online better. Policies are getting better. It's getting better, right? That's the good news scenario. But much more research is needed moving forward. What I'm trying to do with this conceptual model is to get us talking, kind of using the same terms and the language to get an idea of the various moving parts, because there's so many and it's happening so rapidly. So with that, I think it's going to go to Q&A now. I really look forward to your feedback. So thank you.